Your military transition conflicts with your psychological development. Hey, I am Chuck the bureaucrat, and I'm starting to get the sense that your military transition, especially a military retirement, conflicts with normal human psychological development. To show you what I mean, I gotta tell you a little bit about a developmental model that was put together in the mid-20th century by a guy named Erik Erikson. You're probably familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs and Freud's concepts of the id, ego, and superego. The id represents our basest animal desires. The superego is sort of those institutionalized cultural norms, and the ego is that thing which moderates between those competing id and superego demands. Well, one of the things about Maslow and Freud is that their models, they kind of focus on a narrow portion of the human experience. So in the 1960s, Erikson proposed an 8-stage model that spanned the entirety of a human life. In each of these stages, Erikson claimed that there was a conflict that served as the turning point in development. As a result of the conflict at the center of each stage, an individual either develops a positive quality or they don't. And as each of us grows through these stages, our success or failure in the development of preceding stages sets conditions for future stages. In fact, each stage is about developing the sense of competence that strengthens the ego's ability to balance the competing desires of the flesh and the expectations of society. Now, like I said, there's 8 stages to Erikson's model, but I'm only going to focus on the last 3. The first 5 get you from birth to adolescence, but I'm more interested on the stages that are impacted by military transition. The last 3 stages are young adulthood, that's like 19 to 40, middle adulthood from 40 to about 65, and then maturity, 65 and over. In young adulthood, the conflict is about relationships between intimacy and isolation. In middle adulthood, work and parenthood challenge us with a conflict between being generative or being stagnant. Generativity comes from creating or nurturing things, often raising children and making a difference in the lives of those around us. In maturity, the crisis occurs as we reflect on our lives. If we can reflect positively, the ego is able to maintain integrity, that we made the right choices to set that balance between our personal needs and the needs of society. If we can't reflect positively, then we despair over lost opportunities. All right, here's why I think military service presents a unique challenge. Since most of us enter the military between the ages of 18 and 22, the experience meshes neatly with Erikson's idea of young adulthood. Military service plays a key role in that conflict about relationships. On one hand, the military isolates us from relationships that we used to have. But on the other hand, the military provides opportunities for uniquely intimate relationships with our peers and the units that we belong to. Even the transition into middle adulthood is fairly well timed. Some are going to leave the military and seek civilian employment, and so they're going to get that sense of generativity, that creating and nurturing things outside the military. Some are going to stay, and this is where things start to get weird. Right around 40, 42, people start becoming eligible for military retirement. But that transition comes in the middle of Erikson's middle adulthood crisis over work. Take me, for example. I served 28 years and retired 4 months shy of my 50th birthday. That means that when I am most productive and most capable of making a difference to the people around me, the organization is scooting me away from the places where my experience and training is most useful. Maybe it's happening to you, maybe it's not. But it could be a lot more difficult for some military retirees. I mean, I worked in the Pentagon almost continuously from 2009 until I retired in 2023. And you know what I did the first day I was retired? I went back to the Pentagon and took a contract job doing work that I had done before. But imagine the retiree who goes back to Oshkosh and gets a job at the manufacturing plant. It is a whole new world. And meanwhile, he's likely to be less productive than his civilian counterparts. He's less likely to achieve the growth and the generativity that he needs to be successful in middle adulthood and set the stage for a successful maturity. It's kind of crappy that a successful military career can actually set the stage for years of despair and sense of stagnation. So what do? Well, I am by no means an expert. At best, I'm just a fellow traveler on this journey, but here's what I would do. I think there's 3 actions that you want to take now. Seek rocking chair moments, create something outside of the military, and time your transition. The first thing has to do with setting the conditions that when you're in maturity, 65 and over, and you look back on your life, that you're confident that you made the right decisions. The way I do this is by consciously identifying what I call rocking chair moments. Moments in your life where you know you made a difference. I call them rocking chair moments because they're the kind of stories that you would tell to somebody as you sat on the porch watching the sunset over the lake. The reason seeking these rocking chair moments is important is twofold. First, early on, the military gives you some pretty interesting opportunities to make a difference in the lives of others. I mean, they might not be lifetime achievement type things, but they certainly are important. One time, I found an error in a hand receipt that saved a master sergeant $50,000 in a reporter survey. The second reason that rocking chair moments are important is because you don't want to wait until you need them to try to remember them. You want to be marking them as they happen. The next thing you can do to set conditions so that you win in middle adulthood and maturity is to have something that you create outside of the military. Something that you grow and nurture, but it's not dependent on the late stages of your military career. It's even better if it doesn't depend on what you do immediately after you get out of the military. I have an old friend who used to volunteer at a state forest, fixing trails and guiding tours. It gave him a way to exercise outside, to make a difference on his own terms and with a really flexible schedule. Then, when he retired and as he was making that transition, he leaned more heavily into that volunteer experience. And finally, you might take these factors into consideration as you plan the timing of your own military transition. I've known lots of promising lieutenant colonels and master sergeants who retired exactly at the 20-year mark, specifically so that they could give themselves the time to have a civilian career and get that sense of growth and accomplishment. In fact, if you have the time to watch this video, you'll see why I think that retiring early can actually net you more pension money over the long term than staying till the end of your career.